The cemetery was silent that morning. A soft mist hung over the marble headstones as Margaret Hollingsworth, one of the wealthiest women in the city, walked slowly down the path, clutching a bouquet of white lilies. It had been 5 years since she lost her son, Daniel. Her only child, her pride, her future. The car accident had shattered her world, leaving behind nothing but silence and regret. She visited his grave every Sunday, never missing a week. But today, something was different. As she approached the familiar spot beneath the old oak tree, she stopped. Someone was already there. A young black woman knelt beside Daniel's tombstone, tears streaming down her face. Beside her stood a little boy, no older than 4, holding a single yellow flower in his tiny hands. Margaret froze. She had never seen them before. The woman whispered something to the child, her voice trembling. "Say goodbye to Uncle Daniel." The boy nodded solemnly and placed the flower beside the grave. Margaret's heart pounded. Uncle Daniel? She stepped forward, her heels crunching softly on the gravel. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cool but curious. "Do you know my son?" The woman startled and quickly stood up, wiping her tears. "Mrs. Hollingsworth, I didn't mean to intrude. I'll leave right away." Margaret frowned. "You know who I am." "Yes, ma'am," the woman said quietly. "I used to work at the Willow Creek Cafe. Daniel came there often." Margaret studied her. Modest clothes, tired eyes, hands that had clearly known work. "You were a waitress?" "Yes, ma'am. My name's Tanya." Margaret looked at the boy clinging to Tanya's leg. "And this is your son?" Tanya hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. His name's Noah." There was something in her tone, something heavy, guarded. Margaret's gaze fell to the tombstone again. Fresh flowers were already there, roses, Daniel's favorite, not the lilies Margaret brought every week. She took a breath. "You said Daniel used to visit you?" Tanya nodded slowly. "He did. He was kind. Always sat in my section. He'd ask about my son, about my shifts. Sometimes he'd bring me coffee when I worked double shifts. He said no one deserved to be invisible." Margaret felt a pang in her chest. Daniel had always been kind, but she had never heard this story. Then Tanya's eyes filled again. "When he died, it broke me too. I never got to thank him." Margaret's voice softened, just slightly. "Thank him for what?" Tanya looked down at her son. "For changing our lives." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded letter, the edges worn from being read too many times. "It came a week after the accident," she said, her voice trembling, "from his lawyer. He'd set up a trust fund for Noah." Margaret's eyes widened. "A trust fund?" Tanya nodded. "He said he believed every child deserves a fair start. He didn't tell me why, but he said he'd explain one day." She paused, clutching the letter. "I never took the money. I couldn't. It didn't feel right. I didn't earn it." Margaret was speechless. Her son, her perfect, privileged, sheltered son, had secretly been helping a waitress and her child. The boy tugged on Tanya's sleeve. "Mommy, is this Daniel's mommy?" Tanya knelt down. "Yes, baby. This is Mrs. Hollingsworth." Noah turned to Margaret and smiled shyly. "Thank you for Daniel. He was nice to us." Something cracked inside her, something she didn't know was still breakable. Her throat tightened. You knew my son?" Noah nodded. "He used to bring me toy cars. Said one day I'll drive a real one like his." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. She hadn't cried in years, not since the funeral. But now, hearing her son's name spoken by this innocent little boy, she felt his presence again. She sank to her knees beside the grave. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He never told me about you." Tanya knelt too, her hand trembling. "He said you wouldn't understand." Margaret looked up sharply. Wouldn't understand what? Tanya hesitated, then said softly, that kindness doesn't need permission. That love isn't limited by class or color. The words hit Margaret like a wave. She thought back to all the times she'd lectured Daniel about staying focused, about not mixing with people beneath his world. And now, here was proof that her son had seen humanity more clearly than she ever had. She covered her face, weeping openly. He was a better person than I ever gave him credit for. Tanya gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He loved you, ma'am. He talked about you every time he came by. He said he wished you'd see people the way he did. Margaret looked at her through tears. And now I do. Because of him. Because of you. The wind rustled through the trees. A single petal from the lilies drifted down, landing softly on the tombstone. Margaret took a deep breath. Tanya, may I see that letter again? She unfolded it carefully. In Daniel's handwriting were the words, for Noah. A reminder that every small act of kindness can change a life. If my mother ever finds this, I hope she'll understand why I did it. Margaret pressed the letter to her heart. I understand now, my son. She turned to Tanya. If you never use the trust, I want you to, not as charity, but as a promise that I'll finish what Daniel started. Tanya's eyes widened. Mrs. Hollingsworth, I can't. You can, Margaret interrupted gently. And you will. Daniel's legacy isn't wealth, it's compassion. Noah smiled. Does that mean we can visit Daniel again? Margaret smiled through her tears. Yes, sweetheart, as often as you like. The three of them stood together before the grave, a billionaire, a waitress, and a little boy, bound not by blood or status, but by the quiet power of love and redemption. Months later, Margaret established the Hollingsworth Foundation for Families, a scholarship program for children of single parents working service jobs. At the launch ceremony, she spoke publicly for the first time since Daniel's death. My son taught me that greatness isn't measured by fortune, but by the lives we touch when no one's watching. In the front row, Tanya held Noah's hand proudly. And as Margaret looked out at the crowd, she felt her son's presence, not in the past, but in every future life his kindness would inspire. Because sometimes the people we're taught to overlook are the very ones who help us see the truth. And on that quiet morning at her son's grave, a grieving mother finally understood. The richest hearts are the ones that know how to love without limits.